Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Abner, and I'm the State E-Rate Coordinator for Kentucky Public Libraries. Today's presentation is E-Rate Invoicing Part 1, Funding Commitments, Form 486, and Post-Commitment Changes. So if you've received your funding commitment for 2025, there'll be kind of a file along with me portion where I will go through the steps live. Then we can also talk about things that you can do to make changes to your funding after you receive a commitment. So if you're downloading the slides from Blackboard, the second page is the contents, and it has links to jump directly to various sections in the presentation. There are also some links to jump back to the table of contents for easy navigation. And just a quick disclaimer, I do my level best to give you the most up-to-date, accurate information about E-Rate, but ultimately I am not the authority. So normally you deal with USAC, the Universal Service Administrative Company. They're the daily administrators of the program. They create and process the forms. And sometimes you deal with the Federal Communications Commission. So if I say something in this presentation and later USAC or the FCC contradicts me, go with what they said. Because I'm just, a little nobody in Kentucky doing my best to keep up. All right, before we get into all the 486 stuff, I do want to take a step back and talk about E-Rate funding years and where we are. So at any given time in E-Rate, you may be working on tasks related to 2 to 3 different funding years. So that first row in pink for funding year 2024, that is the current funding year we're in, and it will end on June 30th, 2025. So at this point, we're getting ready to gear up to do a lot more invoicing. I will cover the invoicing form, the bear form, in E-Rate Invoicing Part 2, which has not yet been scheduled. And then funding year 2025 is in yellow. That's the upcoming funding year that begins on July 1st. So we've gone through competitive bidding, applications have been submitted, many of them have been reviewed, and now lots of libraries are filing the Form 486 for the service start date and a certification regarding compliance with the Children's Internet Protection Act, or CIPA. And then funding year 2026, because it's never too early to be thinking about E-Rate. Technically starting July 1st, we could start doing 470s for that funding year. It's a little early, I think, for that, but if you're raring to go on 2026, hit me up in July and we'll start competitive bidding. Okay, the funding commitment decision letter. So what is a funding commitment? So after USAC reviews your Form 471 application, they will issue a funding commitment decision letter, or FCDL. So that will tell you the overall amount committed for the entire application, and then it will show the amounts committed for each of the funding requests on the application. And the commitment means that, if E-Rate invoicing, if the actual invoicing for your services comes in as expected at the same prices, the funding commitment is the maximum refund or discount that you're going to receive from the E-Rate program. So if services are less expensive for some reason, you will get your discount rate applied to that lower amount, meaning there may be some funds left over at the end of the funding year, and that's totally fine. Now, if things come in more expensive than expected, more expensive than what you listed on the application, your library will be out the difference. Your funding commitment caps you at a certain amount, so anything over that is just out of pocket for you guys. So when you get the funding commitment decision letter, it will arrive via email. It goes to the person who certified the Form 471 application. There are actually two attachments. The most complete information is the PDF copy of the FCDL. There's also an Excel file that has a slice of the same information, but generally that's used by service providers in their invoicing systems. It's not really formatted to be printed, so just worry about the PDF. You can also access the funding commitments at any time inside the E-Rate Productivity Center. So if you log in on My Applicant landing page, there's a section for notifications. You can change the notification type to Funding Commitment Decision Letter, choose the appropriate funding year, and you'll see results if any funding commitments were issued. In the results, if there is one, at the right, you'll be able to click on View Notification, and that will take you to a newsfeed entry where you can download a copy of the funding commitment again. So here's what it looks like in the news feed. You can see at the bottom of the entry, there's a little icon picture of the PDF, or you have the Excel file. Just taking a quick look at the FCDL, page 1 will show you the total amount committed to the entire application. So if you have multiple funding requests on an application, that's going to be the combination of funding committed for all of the FRNs on the application. Page 4, you'll see comments about the application. So if you submitted corrections, or if the reviewer had to make changes, they would make notes about what they did overall on the application. Also on page 4, that's where they start showing each particular funding commitment, its status as funded or not funded, and there are comments from the reviewers. So that's a lot of the time where you will see a comment about a change that's made. Another way to get information about your funding commitments is to go to E-Rate Central. They're a consulting company that very kindly downloads E-Rate data from the public databases, and then they reorganize it in, I think, a way that's easier for people to navigate through than trying to dig through USAC databases. So they have a page for the state of Kentucky, and on that page, on the left-hand side, there is a funding quick search. You can type in your library's billed entity number, hit search, and then you'll get a page that shows all of the E-Rate funding years back to 1998. You can click on the year to see more details. You can also drill down into each particular funding request to see more information. Often when somebody calls me, this is the first page I bring up for the library, just to have a quick idea of where you guys are in a particular funding year. Okay, invoicing modes. So there are a couple options for invoicing. Let's talk about those. So every year when you have a new funding commitment, it is a new opportunity to decide how you want to handle the discounts. So in the next couple of pages, we're going to talk about service provider invoicing, or SPI, and the billed entity applicant reimbursement form, or BEAR. So at the beginning of the year, whatever the decision is made, the first form that's filed, whether the vendor files a SPI form or you file a BEAR form for reimbursement, that sets the mode for the year. All right, so the Form 474, or the SPI form, is where your vendor has applied the E-Rate discounts up front on the monthly bill or on the invoice, and then they're billing you the non-discounted share of the services. So for example, if your internet provider is applying SPI discount and you qualify for a 90% discount, they will apply the 90% discount and bill you for the 10%. If you're in a situation where for category 2, you have some things that are partially eligible, you would get your discounts on the eligible portion of the cost, and then you're paying the non-discounted share of the eligible cost plus all of the ineligible costs. So sometimes when you want SPI discounts, you may have to fill out additional paperwork that's specific to the provider. So Spectrum, the first time you want to set up SPI discounts, there's a particular form to fill out for discount election. After that, they just work on the assumption that you want to continue doing SPI discounts each year, so you don't have to fill it out every single year. For AT&T, every single year they will send an email that links to their E-rate page where you have to put in some information to set up SPI discounts to begin in 1 to 2 business cycles. And of course, I've got some experience with the various providers. Windstream, we email them. I think Comcast has a web page to fill things out. You may receive an automated email from your service provider giving you instructions about how to set up SPI discounts if you'd like. The nice thing about SPI discounts is that it's generally less paperwork for you. The real invoicing burden is on the provider. They have to file the form with USAC to be reimbursed. There are times during that review process for the vendor SPI form that you may be asked to do what's called a service certification, where you basically say, yes, this is when I paid it, and here's my check number. Yes, I received those services, so that USAC knows that you really made the payment, you really got the services. It doesn't happen super often, but they do periodically tag different vendors for some invoice review, just as part of their program integrity assurance. Now, one caveat is that depending on the provider, sometimes it can take 1, 2, even 3 billing cycles for the discounts to go into effect. Depending on your library's fiscal situation, you may want to get your hands on the funding more quickly, so you may be better off filing bearer forms, and I'm glad to talk to your library about what option may be best. Okay. Then over to the bearer form, the Billed Entity Applicant Reimbursement Form. That is the last time I will say it during this presentation. So you file a bearer form when you have paid the full cost of the services up front and you want to be reimbursed for the discount via direct deposit. So in addition to having filed the bearer, you do need to have up-to-date direct deposit information on file through what's called the Form 498. At this point, most Kentucky libraries have that filed, and we can just modify the form if something about the direct deposit information changes, different contact person, change in routing number, change in account number. We'll cover the Form 498 in E-rate Invoicing Part 2. So for the bearer form, you can file bearers as often as you're invoiced. So we do have a couple of libraries that file bearer forms every single month after they're invoiced for their internet or their bookmobile hotspot service. Some libraries file quarterly, some every 6 months. About half of the libraries that file bearers wait until the entire funding year has ended, and then they file one bearer form to be reimbursed for the entire year. So again, that's really up to you. As long as you have received the service and you've paid for it, you can do the bearer, and you can set up an appointment with me anytime you want to file a bearer. I don't care how often it is. I would rather help you every time to make sure it's done correctly than leave you to your own devices and something goes sideways. So the invoicing deadline for the bearer is 120 days after the last date for service. So for monthly recurring services like internet access, the last date for service in the funding year is June 30th. And so that puts the invoicing deadline at October 28th. There is a later installation deadline for one-time Category 2 purchases of networking equipment and cabling. So that deadline isn't until September 30th, and that actually moves the invoicing deadline to January 28th, following the end of the funding year. Now, you do have an opportunity before your deadline passes to put in one extension request that will be automatically approved. So if you're thinking, gosh, I don't think I can get my bear form filed by October 28th, you can go into the system and put in that extension request. But you do just have that one time. Anything beyond that, you would have to get approval directly from the FCC, and it would have to be for a pretty darn good reason, like a natural disaster. Now, bear forms are more paperwork on your end, but I do think it gives you better control of when the funding is received. So, I'm not particular to, either way of doing invoicing. It's whatever's most convenient and advantageous for your library. Okay, so the Form 486. This is about releasing the funding for invoicing. So 3 purposes. You're indicating the service start dates. You are making a certification regarding your library's compliance with the Children's Internet Protection Act. You're also formally accepting and releasing funding to be invoiced once the funding year begins on July 1st. And so there needs to be a Form 486 on file for any particular funding request before some kind of invoicing can occur. So if you haven't filed the 486 and it's July and you're getting invoiced for your internet discounts for the month of July, your vendor will not be willing to apply discounts up front because they are blocked from filing their SPI forms for reimbursement due to the lack of a Form 486. And if you prefer to pay the full invoice up front, but you haven't filed the 486, you're blocked from doing the bear form. So it's good to go ahead and early file these forms just so they're out of the way, and that'll remove any barriers to invoicing once the funding year begins. So the deadline to file the Form 486 is either 120 days from the start of service, which is usually July 1st, or 120 days from the date that the funding commitment decision letter is issued, whichever comes later. So for libraries that are funded by July 1st, the Form 486 deadline for 2025 will be October 29th, 2025. And I do my best to make sure everybody has filed the 486 by that date. However, if your funding commitment doesn't come out until sometime after July 1st, your actual deadline would be a little bit later. There is technically a deadline tool where you can enter the date of your funding commitment and the service start date, and the system will tell you what your deadline is. I have found that it's not really working very well right now. I tested it and tried to put in dates and hit calculate, and it just turned the page white. Didn't give me any results. You may have better luck than I do, but we can always manually calculate the date if needed. So early filing is what most Kentucky libraries are going to opt for. So in order to early file your 486, you have to have received your funding commitment decision letter. The services on the funding request that will be listed on the Form 486 will have to start in the month of July. You can truthfully make all of the certifications on the form, including compliance with the Children's Internet Protection Act, and you are filing the form on or before July 31st. So I think early filing is great if you can do it, just to make sure there aren't any snags for E-rate invoicing once the funding year begins. But if you're not needing to file a bear form right away, it's fine to file the form after July 31st. You will get a notification from USAC if you have missed the deadline. There's kind of a 15-day grace period where you can file the application without any penalty. If you don't file the Form 486 on time, it starts prorating your funding. So you want to get it on file so you don't miss out on any of your discounts. So again, for the service start dates, most libraries are applying for recurring services. This would be your Category 1 internet access for library buildings, transport circuits between branches, or internet access for the bookmobile, cellular data. Could also be Category 2 equipment maintenance or managed services. So it's services that occur on a regular schedule, you're regularly invoiced, even if it's not actually every single month. So for recurring services, they must be received between July 1st and June 30th of the particular funding year. And almost always the service start date on recurring service FRNs is going to be July 1st. The only time it's not is if you're in a situation where you've got a contract that ends mid-year and you're having to start a new contract, or you're going month to month with the same provider. But I would say, gosh, probably 98% of the funding requests will have July 1 as the start date. Then non-recurring services are also known as one-time purchases. So this would be your Category 2 internal connections for pieces of networking equipment, licensing for that equipment, and also cabling. And so generally, we just list July 1st as the start date, because really what the form is asking for is the earliest possible start date. And July 1st is the first date that the invoicing system will accept a SPI form or a bear form. However, we do have early purchase installation for Category 2, but really for all purposes, July 1st is going to be the date that you list. If for some reason you think you need to be listing a later date, please talk to me first before you do that on the form. Because if you make changes to the service start date, that tends to trigger a review process, and that slows down approval for your Form 486, and we don't want that. We really don't. Okay. There is advanced installation. So for Category 1, there are charges for the setup or installation of service that can happen, up to 6 months prior to the start of the funding year on July 1st. So sometimes, because vendors have so many customers that are going to need to start new service on July 1st, they may already be working on installation right now because they can't fit everybody in the week before July 1st. So those charges can occur, but if they occur, you still can't submit an invoicing form, the vendor submitting a SPI or your library submitting a bear, until July 1st. And then for Category 2, you can have charges that start as soon as April 1st before the funding year begins. So between April 1st and June 30th, prior to the start of the funding year, that's early purchase installation. So same deal, you can be invoiced, the services can be installed, but no one's going to have access to the actual E-rate funding until July 1st. So generally, if you're using early purchase or installation, you can expect to pay the full amount of the invoice up front and then hold on to it until at least July, when you can file a bear form. It's very rare for a vendor to be willing to apply discounts during the early purchase period because you may not have your funding commitments during early purchase. You may not have filed the 486, and you definitely don't have access to the invoicing system. So again, if you're not sure about whether or not you should do early installation, please reach out to me. So a common question is, how many Forms 486 can I file? And the answer is as many as you need. So a lot of times I'll have a library just file one Form 486 if they've already received the funding commitment decision letters for all of their applications. In that case, you can just do one and done. There are folks, though, who prefer to have one Form 486 per application, so it's kind of matchy-matchy. I got my Category 1 funding commitment. Here's my 486 for Category 1. I got my Category 2 funding commitment. Here's my 486 for Category 2. It does not matter. As long as you've got a 486 on file for the relevant funding request, by the time invoicing needs to occur, it's all good. So you may end up filing 2 or more forms if there's kind of a delay between when you get a commitment for one application and you've got some other application in review. Generally, libraries get their Category 1 commitments first prior to Category 2. That's not a hard and fast rule. So you may want to go ahead and get something on file so there aren't delays for your internet access discounts starting in July, and then you'll circle back and do another 486 later. All right, so part of the form concerns compliance with the Children's Internet Protection Act, or CIPA. So most Kentucky libraries, over 90%, are CIPA compliant and have been for many years. CIPA first went into effect for libraries in 2003 after a Supreme Court lawsuit, ALA versus, I believe, FCC, for that. There are 3 elements that comprise CIPA compliance. So first up is having an internet safety policy or internet use policy that addresses certain elements of children's safe use of the internet while they're at the library. Basically, it's the parents' responsibility to make sure that they're not accessing or doing dumb things. That's pretty much what it boils down to. At some point prior to implementing the internet safety policy, you must have advertised a public hearing where the community could give feedback. A lot of times that was done in 2002, 2003. Sometimes libraries lose track of the documentation about having had that meeting. So if you're not able to track down documentation that you advertised a meeting, the agenda from the meeting, maybe a board resolution if it was part of a regular board meeting. If you don't have that kind of documentation, you just need to hold the hearing again. That's pretty common given how old CIPA is now. The most important element, though, is having a technology protection measure or a filter. So for CIPA, you have to filter for visual images only that would be considered obscenity, child pornography, or harmful to minors. And harmful to minors basically is the definition of obscenity, but in regards to minors, which to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, obscenity is obscenity. Is there a special form of obscenity when you're talking about like a teenager? I don't know. To me, it's kind of weird, but basically it's referring to sexual materials. And if you have more questions about complying, obviously let me know. For CIPA compliance, you have to be compliant if you're asking for discounts on any kind of internet access for a building, for the bookmobile, or anything under E-rate Category 2. So that would be internal connections, basic maintenance of internal connections, and managed services. The one exception is if your library is requesting discounts only on telecommunications services. That's basically data transmission or transport services between branches. Currently, there's only one library that does this, Lexington Public Library. So they are billed separately for the transport circuits that connect all of their branches. And then there's another invoice for internet access. So they ask for E-rate discounts on the transport circuits only. Since that's telecommunications, they don't have to be CIPA compliant. But any other library besides Lexington Public, you need to be CIPA compliant. If you make a certification that said, yep, I'm CIPA compliant as I'm supposed to be for these services, and you weren't actually compliant, you could be forced to repay funds to the program for the time period where you were not compliant. So don't accept funding if you're not actually compliant with CIPA. If you're not sure, we can work on redoing the internet policy in the public hearing, to make sure that you get compliant. We do have an archived webinar, Internet Filtering CIPA Compliance. So you can access that through the archived webinars page, or again, happy to set up an appointment to talk to you about CIPA. All right, so now we're getting to the Form 486 walkthrough. Before I switch over to screen sharing, you may want to file along with me if you've not already filed your Form 486. So I have some slides that are about the basic login process. The last time I did this presentation, it was right after multi-factor authentication had been added to the portal. So I felt like I really needed to go over those steps about getting logged into the system. So let me go ahead and switch over to a screen share. It's going to take a moment to start. Wait a second. I think I'm sharing the wrong screen. Sorry about that. I normally don't have two screens set up, but I'm in the training room and we have a two screen setup and I goofed. I did the wrong thing. So I need to share a screen too. Okay. So let me go over to a new tab. Now I'm going to go to the E-Rate Productivity Center training portal. So I just showed you some slides about logging into the system. When you're using the training portal, it doesn't have multi-factor authentication. Just kind of lets you go right in. So that is one difference, but otherwise this mirrors what you see in the live production version of E-Rate Productivity Center. So there are a couple of ways to file a Form 486. The easiest thing to do is on my applicant landing page, click on the FCC Form 486 link. The other way to get to it is to go into the library system profile, and from the related actions tab, there's a link to create an FCC Form 486. If you have started a 486 but not finished it, you'll be able to pick it back up again under the tasks list. Now, I do want to let you know that unfortunately for the training portal, USAC only creates so many training logins, and they did not have an account with 2025 examples. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a nickname like this is 2025. So I'll say FY 2025-2026. Let's say Cat 1 and 2. But just for the purposes of the walkthrough, you guys are going to be selecting 2025. But I have to select 2019 because that happens to be the funding request that they set up in the system that I have access to. So just ignore that. And then you start typing your first name. In this case, I am Independent Library Admin 15. But you start typing your first name, you'll get a box with your full name and email. Click on that when it appears. And continue. All right, so then you're on the Submitting Organization Details page. And there's a set of filters that are automatically set to bring up all of the funding requests for the year you selected that have not already appeared on a Form 486. So if, for example, you're Pulaski County Public Library, and we met earlier this week to file the Form 486, if you went to this page, there wouldn't be any results because you've already done them and your last application hasn't been funded yet. Now, this example has many more funding requests than most Kentucky libraries will have. The easiest thing to do is to click on the button that says Add All Number Funding FRNs, or Funding Request Numbers. If you click on that and scroll down the page, there's a section with selected FRNs, and all of the funding requests will be copied there. Let's say I don't want to include all of them. I'm also going to show you how to add individual ones. Just a sec while I delete these off. The other option is if for some reason you don't want to include all the FRNs on the 486, for example, you've received your funding commitments for both Category 1 and Category 2, but your preference is to file one Form 486 for Category 1, one Form 486 for Category 2, you may be selecting individual ones. So I can just go through and check particular ones. I can also go to the filter for category of service and just tell the system I want Category 1. And in that case, I can check individual funding requests to add to the system, and then I go over to the right and click Add Number FRNs. So for this example, we're just going to do the Category 1 funding requests for 2019. Really wish they'd update that. So once you've got all the FRNs selected that you want, you click on Continue. The next page is for updating the service start date if needed. So this is going to be pretty rare, but if for some reason you know the service is delayed, you can check the box beside a particular request, and it gives you a field where you could type in, what that actual start date is. But again, it's going to be really, really, really rare for you to do that. So I'm just going to delete this off and uncheck this box. Again, unless you've got a contract that's ending in the middle of the year, all of your funding requests should say July 1st. And continue. All right, the next page has two options. Now, early filing is what you do if you are filing this form on or before July 31st. So on or before July 31st, you need to check early filing. After that, you just leave that blank. You just don't check it, which is totally fine. There's also an option for CIPA waiver, but that's extremely rare now. Most libraries filing for E-rate have filed for internet access at least twice since funding year 2001, and therefore they can't take this waiver. So I don't expect anybody to check the CIPA waiver this year. So no, no, no. And then I'm ready to continue to the certification section. So the top section has two certifications. So the first one is just that these services are going to be provided to eligible entities. You sign contracts if they were required. And you're authorized to submit, this particular form on behalf of the billed entity. And then the other option is making sure that the appropriate discount goes to the appropriate entity. You may be audited, and you need to keep paperwork for 10 years after the last date for service in the funding year. So those two certifications everyone makes. Then in the CIPA certification, you can select only one option. The first option indicates that your library complies with the Children's Internet Protection Act. So again, if you are anyone except Lexington Public, you need to be checking the first option. The second option is very rare. It's for libraries or schools that are still in the second year of applying for the program. They're still getting CIPA compliant. Again, extremely, extremely rare. The last option is if you don't need to comply with the Children's Internet Protection Act because you're applying only for telecommunications. But again, really expect everybody to be checking option number 1. Then you can click on the preview button, and that will bring together all of the responses from the previous pages together on one page. Unlike some other forms, there's really not anything to double check here. Do you want to note that if you are early filing the form, you should have 4 certifications listed. Early filing, the 2 general certifications, and then the CIPA certification. If you're filing after the early filing period, you should only see 3. So now I'm ready to click on the blue Certify button, and I get the usual pop-up that's asking me to confirm that I understand that I can be liable for prosecution for making false statements on the form, and that I'm authorized to represent the library. So I will say yes. Then immediately after that, there's a certification or certifier information page. You'll need to follow the link that says click here to view and print the FCC Form 486. So this takes you to the record in the system for your Form 486. So you'll see everything that was entered on the form, but the certification section is collapsed at the moment. Now, unlike some of the other forms you file, like the Form 470 for competitive bidding and the Form 471 application for discounts, the Form 486 does not generate a nicely formatted PDF automatically. This goes back to the long and troubled history of the E-Rate Productivity Center. When this module debuted in 2016, it didn't work really good. It worked very badly. And so it's never had some of the functionality of some of the other forms. So we're going to have to do a little prep work so that I can either print a hard copy or do a save as PDF option. So first thing I'm going to do at the lower right is click on a button that says it's a print preview. Please note that it is not actually a print preview, but you're going to click on it anyway. So we get a pop-up. This feature will expand the certifications and service information sections to print using browser functionality or hit Control-P. Do you want to continue? And yes, I want to continue. So basically, this pops out the certification section. You'll note here that there are a lot more certifications listed than what you saw when you were filling out the form. And that's because on the record itself, it lists certifications that may be for schools only, or certifications that may be for a consortium. And so there are little check marks in the background of the web page for the 4 certifications that I selected. So now that this is visible, I'm ready to print. So I can go to File and choose Print. I can right-click, choose Print. I can do Control-P, whatever you normally do on a web page that doesn't have a dedicated print button. When you bring up the printer prompt, you do need to, in the panel with the printer settings, open the More Settings dropdown. And you need to make sure that the option for background graphics is checked. So right now you can see that the check marks for the certifications I selected appear in blue on this preview. If I uncheck background graphics, those check marks go away. And that would not be very helpful to print or save a PDF of a form that doesn't actually show the check marks for the certifications you selected. So make sure background graphics is enabled, and then you can click on Print, Save as PDF, or you may come back and do this twice, once for a print copy and once for the electronic copy, as you prefer. Then in addition to the Form 486 itself, there is an additional form to file. I'm now going to get my screen share stopped. And I'm going to go back over to our presentation and let me get my slides going again to show you the next part. Just a second, I have to scroll through a bunch of slides to pick up where I want. Okay, let's see here. Okay, I'll pick up here. All right, so you can print the Form 486 right away after you've certified it. But if you need to go back and find it later, you can. If you're on the landing page, you would scroll to the very bottom of the page to the section for looking up FCC forms and post-commitment requests. You'll change the form type to the Form 486 and then choose the relevant funding year, and then the result will appear below. You can click on the form number to go to that particular record. Now, besides the copy of the form itself, you also will want to save the Form 486 notification letter. The notification letter just means that your Form 486 was approved. So unless you've checked the wrong certifications, you really should get that right away. Usually 486s, if you are choosing that you are CIPA compliant and you haven't messed with the dates or done anything weird, it should be automatically approved. So right away, you'll get this email message. There are 2 attachments. And once again, the most complete information that's meant to be printed is the PDF attachment. There's also an Excel file, but again, it is used by service providers and their invoicing systems and just really isn't formatted for printing. Now, once again, if you lose track of that email, you can always go back into the portal to find a copy. Back on the landing page, you will go to the notification section. The notification type you'll set to FCC Form 486 notification letter. And by default, it's just going to bring up all of the notification letters for all of the years we've been using this system. So the results may go back to 2016 if your library has been filing every year. The most recent 486 will be the first on the list. Again, in the right-hand column, you'll click on View Notification to see the entry in the news feed. If needed, there's additional guidance on the USAC website about filing the Form 486. They also have a 5-minute video that you can watch about filing the form as well. Just in case, for some reason, you're dissatisfied with little old me, it won't hurt my feelings. If you need to watch a different video, as long as you're getting the information you need to file correctly, I don't really care where you get the information from. Okay, so now let's talk about some post-commitment requests or things you can do after you get a funding commitment. So we've got 4 different types of changes to talk about. So these are made after a funding commitment decision letter is issued. So appeals, service substitutions, spin changes, and Form 500 changes. Anytime you file one of these type of post-commitment forms, after USAC has reviewed it and made its decision, they will issue a revised funding commitment decision letter, or FCDL. So appeals. Within 60 days of getting your funding commitment, you can file an appeal directly to USAC to ask them to reconsider if something has gone wrong on the application. Let's see, trying to think. For example, last year I had a library where the library made a mistake. They entered the amount as one-time purchase when it should have been entered as a monthly recurring charge. So not only was it really kind of the wrong type of payment, the funding request was very, very low. It was like $500 one time when it should have been $500 each month times 12 months during the funding year. So the library was able to submit an appeal for having made what they call a ministerial and clerical error. It's basically a typo. Just kind of goofed up a bit on the entry, and then USAC reconsidered it and issued a revised funding commitment decision letter for what should have been the full amount. Now, it's pretty rare for them to commit more funding. That's kind of a rare example. Other times things that have happened would be, we found out that there's a merger and our service provider has changed. We need to change it on the form. Things like that. Or maybe there's an error that USAC made. Every once in a while, a reviewer will make the wrong kind of change. Like we ask for a certain correction, they made it incorrectly, changed something that should not have been changed, and we need to go back and have it fixed. So whatever the situation is, you've got those 60 days to appeal to USAC to ask them to reconsider. If you need an appeal, but it's been more than 60 days, you have to file the appeal directly with the Federal Communications Commission to get some kind of waiver request for whatever it is that needs to be done. Obviously, if you need to file that, I will be glad to assist. There's more information about appeals on the USAC website. So service substitutions are used when, for some reason, the original product or service you thought you were going to buy is not available. Or maybe you realize after you filed the application that you need a different model of something because the model you selected isn't actually compatible with your network. So you can submit that through the service delivery date. So for monthly recurring services, you have until June 30th of the funding year to file a service substitution. Usually if that happens, it's because a service provider kind of gave you a free upgrade. You're paying the same amount, but instead of getting 500 meg internet, you're getting gigabits or something along those lines. Or the vendor thought they could deliver 1 gigabit service to you, but for some reason they can only do 900 megs. So anytime there's a discrepancy in the service, that's when you file the service substitution. And it does need to be for the same functionality. So under category 2 equipment, for example, if I realize I need a different firewall, I can substitute one firewall for what I originally listed as the firewall in the application. But I can't say, oh, actually, I need a rack. Can you change the line item that was for a firewall? You can't do that because it's not the same functionality. And you can't receive more funding than what was originally committed through a service substitution. So if what you're substituting is more expensive than the original line item, then you're just out the difference. If for some reason it costs less than what the original product did, they will lower the funding commitment so that you're getting the appropriate discount rates on that lower cost. So again, the deadline for service substitutions for recurring services like monthly internet is June 30th. The service substitution deadline for non-recurring or one-time purchases like category 2 equipment is September 30th following the end of the funding year. So as an example, for funding year 2025, the service delivery deadline for category 2 is September 30th of 2026. So once you get a service substitution, you may be given additional time to complete invoicing, depending on how close you were to the invoicing deadline. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on. So if you're making the service substitution kind of late, then you may get some additional time to file it. Also, for the service delivery deadlines, if you have not filed the service substitution by the service delivery deadline, then you would have to appeal to the FCC and ask for a waiver of the service substitution deadline. And that's fairly simple to do. It usually takes 2 to 3 months to get that approved. And usually the FCC is okay with, approving something like that. Then there are spin changes. So this is when something about the service provider has changed. There are 2 types of spin changes. The first is a corrective spin change. So that might be where you accidentally listed the wrong spin for the provider on the application. Or it could be a situation where there was a merger and your provider got bought by another company, and so now you need to do that parent company spin. The other type of change is an operational spin change, and that's where you absolutely have to actually switch vendors. It's not just that there was a merger, but you actually had to jump ship, go to a totally different provider because maybe your original service provider is going through bankruptcy, or there's some other reason that they are just not able to provide service. Like they said, oh, we're going to be delivering this gigabit fiber internet, and then it turns out, oh wait, we actually can't do that speed. We can't do fiber, or for some reason the service is a disaster and it's just constantly down and you don't really have reliable internet. That would be a situation where you could actually say, USAC, I had to switch. They forced my hand, and now this is the different provider that I'm using. And you may at the same time also be doing a service substitution in that situation. So if you have a situation where you got some months of service from your original provider and then you had to switch to another, they'll do what's called a split FRN. So they will take a portion of the funding for the original service, keep some of the funding there. They will make a new funding request for the months of service under a new provider. So it just kind of splits up your internet funding, as an example. The Form 500 is a multi-purpose kind of jack of all trades form. So you can use that to adjust the Form 486 service start dates. You can adjust or extend the contract expiration date that's listed on an application. You can get an extension on service delivery and installation. And that would be for non-recurring services like installing Category 2 equipment. You can cancel a funding request or reduce the amount of a funding request, keeping in mind that that is irrevocable. So once you give back some funding, you can't say, oops, I made a mistake, give me the funding again. So you got to be really careful about doing that one. The other function is to notify USAC of an equipment transfer, but that's really not something libraries need to do anymore. The rules about that changed in 2021, so now you can just make notes in your own inventory. You don't have to be filing a form to say, hey USAC, I moved this firewall I bought with E-Rate from one branch to the other. That's just not a concern anymore. Also, at this point, I don't expect anybody to be filing a Form 500 that should have been filed in the old system for funding your 2015 and prior. Really, at this point, we're dealing with just 2016 and forward. That's filed in the E-Rate Productivity Center. But I did want to list that there is a way to file Forms 500 for years from 2015 and prior, if for some bizarre reason that comes up. Which again, cannot even think of a situation where that would happen now. Okay, about out of time, but luckily we are at the wrap-up phase. So I've got some links to various resources like KDLA's E-Rate page or archived webinars page, the main USAC website. You've got a phone number for customer service, or you can create a customer service case in the E-Rate Productivity Center. And you've also got some other options under USAC's training page. If you're not on it already, I encourage you to join the Kentucky Tech Listserv. There's an email you can send to a particular account to ask for that, or you can just email me directly and I'll add you. So that's where we post notices about, upcoming trainings and grant opportunities, E-Rate reminders, and you can ask or answer questions from other libraries. So again, archive webinars page, there is a filter by category. You'll want to look at the E-Rate section to find previous presentations. And then there is my contact information, so please feel free to email me, call me at 502-564-1728, or I've got a bookings page. If you have any email from me, the bookings page is linked at the bottom of my email signature. All right, let me check to see if there are any questions. I don't see any questions, but I will hang out for a few more minutes. So if you've got a question particular to your library or need me to restate something, I'll go ahead and do that. But otherwise, have a delightful afternoon.